All right, well, good afternoon, and we will go ahead and get started with this session. My name is Jason Clodfelter. I'm a GIS analyst in Forsyth County, city of Winston-Salem. But we're glad that you're here for our second addressing session this afternoon. We do have three presentations for you. We are going to go a little bit out of order. Our apologies for any inconvenience on that. But Scott Davis with Bradshaw Consulting, who was scheduled to be third, we moved him up to first, and then we'll go in order from there. But Scott Davis is with us from Bradshaw Consulting, and he's got a plethora of experience in development of applications as they pertain to addressing and E911 emergency services, among other things. He's got experience in the local government sector as well from his time with City of Rock Hill. And so there's more bio on the app. And if he wants to talk any more about himself, we'll let him do that. But right now we'll have Scott come forward.
All right. Good afternoon. They asked me to talk about trying to think how to put this in words. How would you take your existing data and export it or report it to NG911? And how would that be a hardship, or what would be some of the difficulties? So that's kind of what I'm going to cover. And of course, I know when people look at if you look at the current standards that are out there that are still, unfortunately, seem like never going to be approved, it's almost 80 pages long, and sometimes it's like reading, the old IBM manual. You had to have, probably several PhDs in computer science, or in this case, several PhDs in addressing standards and E911 standards, etc. So I'm going to try to simplify that, but actually I'm going to turn to a twist on this as I get into it, because it is not as difficult to get your data into the format of NG911 as it is the data itself. So let's get this up. All right. So it's going to kind of talk about, first of all, the importance a little bit, the data sets involved, the data schema, and the approach possibly to take, or things that you may need to consider. Of course, the importance is location validation. Remember, this is not your MSAG anymore. Everything now with CAD companies, they're also tying into your E911 and all the E911 software / CAD companies. This stuff is being geo-verified. It's not hitting a flat text file with a set of ranges and a street name and a community that's telling you things. This is more GIS-centric. Also, geospatial call routing. In other words, who or which agency is going to handle the dispatching. And then, of course, if you actually have things like routing in your data to also do routing. More than just address ranging and site points, but now these data spatially relate the following. Of course, your PSAP, fire, law, EMS, also things maybe on a map that the dispatcher or an in-vehicle system needs to see, things like municipalities, communities, railroads, hydrology, etc. Anything to help locate that specific event. And like I said here, this is not a vague MSAG anymore. There's three categories that you need to kind of, when you look at the document, to kind of separate this. First, there are the required features that you need, then the recommended, and then the optional. The required, of course, first of all, this is to me kind of bleeding over from trying to convert my MSAG into a geo database. To me personally, I would have took the site points into this as well. But as for this right now, the requirements are your road center lines, of course, your PSAP boundary, and your all your service boundaries for law, EMS, and fire. What I have found is, and we'll talk about the road center lines in a minute, but also have found with some various clients is that a lot of their boundaries are not as accurate as they could be, and now it needs to be as well. Because before they were just doing a range that may have went from 100 to 1,099. Well, now it may not go quite to 1,099. They may do just that. So now you got to start thinking about where that boundary actually resides geographically. The recommended, of course, whole list here. Of course, here's where your address points come in, and all your incorporated, unincorporated boundaries, et cetera. A lot of this kind of looks standard. Then, of course, anything else to help in terms, especially if you're looking at mapping, to be able to verify where that location is, like railroads. Actually, when I worked for the city of Rock Hill, we made our railroads because there's two major lines that go through Rock Hill. The railroad was actually part of the street center line because there would be cases where somebody may call in and give, I'm at, South Oakland and the railroad. Well, that's an intersection. So you couldn't travel down the railroad. All that was taken care of, but the railroad was actually treated as a center line. But here it can be a separate feature class. All right, so when you look at the schema, and this is the one for roads, really about the only thing you really need to pay attention to is the MCO and what type. Okay, so what format. Then, of course, then you just have the descriptions. And I kind of break this out here. Of course, one is just a standard name. Now, this is something that is kind of odd. This is talking about the NG911 type database. If you currently have your own data structure, your own schema, you may not need to worry about the 10 characters or less, because you may export your data into a NG911 format on a periodic basis, okay? But if you're going to try to really comply to this, your current address model, pay attention to that one. Then your MCO, mandatory, conditional, optional fields. Basically, definitely look at the mandatory and what their format is. Then, of course, the type's kind of explanatory as well, so we won't go through that. But anyway, it's actually, when you start looking at those, it's not that confusing, really. It's actually pretty simple in terms of if you know how to set your database up. May use an internal JS data model for daily maintenance, but then you have to export the data into the NG911 GIS data model. So there you may want to use something like Python, or if not, if you know ArcObjects or any other type of language to be able to take your data and just port it over to that model. All right. One thing that you do need to remember is that the conditional fields need to be in the NG911 model. So make sure that those are set to blank if you don't use them at all. A conditional field would be something like a can't remember what the schema was now. They had, actually, zip code information is a conditional field. All right, so if you don't have zip code information, just make sure that that's populated either with a 0 or blank. All right, of course, focus on the required recommended data sets first. Evaluate your existing attributes against the mandatory and the conditional attributes. Existing attribute parsing. This is very important. Some of the clients that I have dealt with is that in converting their address data into an address model is that they had their street name in one field. It's always easier to have things in parts than it is to have it as a whole, because I can always put it together. I can always run some concatenation command or some process to put it together. So if I can break this stuff up, this is very important with things like house numbers. Some of the clients' data comes in. It says 100 space A. Okay. The A could be an apartment or a unit type letter. Okay. It's better to parse that out into its own unit field or its own suffix field. Again, your address information may be already built into business processes for your organization, your utility bill and your permitting system. All right. Just make sure that when you're doing this, you're considering those as well, along with NG911, so that you can develop a system that will work with your existing systems, that, especially with your address points, that may already be tied in. So it takes a little bit of planning. This is not GIS on the fly. So just, lay those things out and make sure that you meet the needs of those as well. If not, you're going to be spending more money on maybe getting a third party that may have your permitting system to update their system. So all that stuff will come into consideration. If you have both streets and address points, this is when we start getting more into the data editing part. Because like I said, converting your data from one format into another format is just a database programming move. Okay, that's pretty simple. But here's talking about the actual accuracy of your data. So if you have both centerline and address points, update both data sets in unison. Okay, remember your old MSAG may say North Main from 100 to 999. We're not doing that anymore. Now we're doing like the hundreds, the 200s, the 300s, the 400s. Make sure all those addresses line up with those segments correctly and making adjustments necessary. And then, of course, for, the address point will highly dictate what your ranges are going to be in terms of your current range or your potential range as well, because you may not have an address at the corner. Remember, your address range goes from the center of the intersection to the center of the intersection, not to the last address that you see. So you may have several more addresses that could be put in there, okay? And like I said, I deal with clients that they say, but none of this even comes close to our MSAG. As of now, the MSAG is very important. Yes, as of right now, the MSAG quote is gospel when it comes to E911. But as I've already seen with various CAD software providers, the MSAG is becoming less and less. And eventually, when you look at the standards for NG911 from NENA, you do see ESN left and right. You see MSAG community left and right, and there'll be a subscript to it. You go down, look what that subscript means. It says, this is here just for legacy. It is going away, okay? So it is no longer. Now, if you don't have ranges on your street, the MSAG may be good to at least get you the starting number of the first segment, but that may be it, okay? This is where the relationship of your data starts becoming very, very important. This GIS is no longer a project in planning anymore, okay? This is critical, very critical. We're not playing with dollars and cents. We're playing with lives, all right? So going to stress that here with systems like this. Address ranging should be true to the current or potential address points. Continuous ranging should not have gaps if you do continuous ranging. Overlapping ranges, the overlapping number range, same street name inside the same community or same postal code cannot exist. Because if the location validation has to do a geocode and can't locate it by an address point and has to hit it based on the street, it could find two possible segments. You want it to find one segment, the right segment, not two. That's the thing with overlapping ranges. address points, no duplicate addresses. In my experience, unfortunately, a good percentage of the address data has a ton of these. Most of the time it's that they never went back and put like unit numbers. Also, let me go ahead and speak about this too. You may also address meters, like electric meters, water meters. Make sure that you classify those as like what I call ghost or a utility, so that data can be filtered out. All right, we're not dispatching to a water meter. Okay, so make sure that that information is not in there. Odd even mismatch. Odd addresses on the even side and vice versa. It's just confusing. Address cannot be out of range of respective segment. All right, so make sure that those comply with each other. And addresses should not be out of sequence. Now, some of these, everybody's saying, but hey, everything's supposed to come in by GPS, and only heard this today, only about 30% of the calls are actually coming in from a landline. Sometimes GPS may not come in, but also even though they have a routing system in their emergency vehicle, they still have to look at house numbers. So you get them out of sequence, they may go right by it. Okay, so yeah, the computer stuff makes this more reliable in terms of who I need to dispatch and how I need to route them. But sometimes when they get out there, they still need to be able to see this stuff in a logical order. All right, ranges. First of all, do they exist? All right, some of my clients, they have some ranges. Sometimes they don't have ranges because they just quote created geometry with street names. And yeah, it made a great map. Great map. Now, this has to have attributes behind it. Also, you need from, to, and left, right ranges. All right, you just can't do from and to. You got to do both sides individually. Are numeric. All right, that field, and also in the schema, numeric. Parity. All right, here you may not need to do this right the get-go, but you can write a routine to calculate this for you. Okay. The street name parts, as I mentioned before, make sure you parse all that out. Of course, all this other information here. Unique segment ID. Okay. It can be numeric. You can always convert it into a NG911 unique ID or GUID when you convert your data. All right, we're going to look at something regarding the MSAG. Here I'm looking at a 400 block. This is in downtown Rock Hill, 400 block. And you can see the last address is like 430 something, 432, I think. But in the MSAG, it said it went from 400 to 499. Okay. But the range should go to about maybe 437. This is fishbones. And what fishbones are, it shows the relationship between the address and where it would geocode on the street. So in the first diagram here, the range is to 499. All right, so then I have zone 1 and zone 2. Well, right now, none of these addresses would ever even come close to falling in zone 2 if it had to match to the street. Okay, for some reason, one other thing I do need to mention, when you come to that point and you think that your addressing is 100%, you just lied to a lot of people. You can do all the field work, been there, done that, follow all the rules that you set in-house. Strange what humans will do. Okay, so, but anyway, so now on the second one here, the second image, the range was adjusted to 436 and 437. Now the fish bones are better aligned with the street segment. In a perfect world, if you did it by continuous addressing and let the computer address it, then these fish bones would be perpendicular. Okay, so, but anyway, that's the thing about vague ranging versus actual addressable ranges on your segments. Of course, your house number. Half of the clients, I deal with, their number is not numeric. Okay. Also, the other name parts, things like half, unit, prefix, suffix, make sure you have all that stuff parsed out. Street name parts, and of course, your unique ID. I'm not going to go much into this. Because actually, I wanted to get to this slide right here. Helping various cities and counties in managing an address system. Street ranging and point management, then this is shocking, is not performed in unison even though one person or department manages the address system. Strange. Street names are spelled wrong on the address points versus the street segments. This address is out of range versus this street segment. Things like that. There's no master street name table. Less than 50% have valid postal attributes. 10 to 20% of the ranging and or address features have critical issues. Agencies interested in using routing, and I talked to some other staff today. They told me I was really, really, really off with this number because it's way less. That if you wanted to use routing, less than 50% comply with the topology and attribute requirements to do routing. When the addressing function is not managed by E911 staff, in most cases, less concern is given to the overall accuracy. What happens is, first of all, if your tax assessor does it, tax assessor is only concerned with one address, and that's the mailing address for that tax bill, period. Sometimes in where your permitting is, which may be in planning or some other department, once that permit's issued, hey, we're done with it. We're done with it. But a lot of times with E911, they know the importance because they got to get their officer or their crew from point A to point B and get it there as fast as they can. And so they don't need to be driving up and down the street trying to find something. They know how critical it is. Also, little or no addressing standards and practices exist. Nothing written down. Oh, but we've always done this for 50 years. Or John over here, he's been with the city for 35 years, and he's always done it. And I said, well, John, did you ever write anything down? No. I said, John, what's going to happen when you retire? I don't know. Make sure that you write these things down. Come up with a set of standards. Because I have been on some phone calls with people, and I said, okay, I said, do you do continuous addressing? Yes. What's your address rate? There's a pause. All right, so is it 1,000th of a mile? Is it 20 feet? Is it your smallest road frontage for a lot? Then they'll finally, then finally somebody will finally speak up and, oh, yeah, I remember. I think we use 40. All right, addressing is freehand without system-based business rules. And that's how a lot of these things like odd and even mismatch, out of range and stuff happens. Unfortunately, there's not an easy button with the accuracy. For a lot of agency, field work will be required. In my experience, this may not be true for everybody, it is best to use your own staff and not a third party. I've had a couple of clients that did a third party. 2 years later, they were back out in the field recollecting everything. Okay. Also, before you do any of this, develop how you're going to manage this data first. Because once you kind of get it 90%, how can I maintain 90% or better? Am I buying third-party software? Or what procedures I have in place to make sure that all this stuff stays in sync, and that my addresses and my roads are in sync with each other, and all my street names are spelled right, and okay, all the business rules. If you are an ESRI shop, there is a few things that are kind of free. There's an attribute assistant add-in that can kind of help you on things like if you need a quote to create a unique identifier or a unique ID, you can do that with the attribute assistant. They also have an address data management add-in. It doesn't have a lot of business rules behind it, but it does handle with setting up a data model. But if you are looking at third-party applications, check to see if they're NG911 compliant. Also, do they have business rules, okay, to stop you from issuing a duplicate address or putting an even address on the odd side or issuing an address out of range, etc. And that's the whole thing about what I mean here by address analytics. Also, do they have a way to run reports to see these issues that you currently have that you may be spending the next 2 years trying to fix? Just a reference here of the publication, also another reference. Last slide here. The porting of existing address data sets to NG911 is not the major hurdle. The accuracy of the address data is. So I think for the vast majority of people here, when you actually really sit down and look at those attributes for NG911, that's not the problem. The problem is the current state of your addressing. That's the problem. And like I said, the days of using the MSAC are over. And if that phone call comes in and it don't have a lat long and they have to do it by some type of geocoding validation, this is when this becomes important, very important. So this is all I have. Any questions? Oh.
Intersections that are small separations, and you have a separate section in the middle, but the town addressed basically to each intersection. So you have like 920 across the street from 1001. Is it going to be able to? Is that going to cause a problem if the evens are in a different block than the odds?
No. No, as long as, remember with NG911, you can have an even side and odd side of both as well. But as long as that segment holds true and those addresses hold true, you're fine. The logic's still there. So one side on this over here could be evens on the right, this over here, evens on the left. All right. Some people have address quadrants or address grids where the right and left in terms of evens switch. All right, so that's not that uncommon.
We know our centerline data isn't perfect. We were feeling pretty good about it 15 minutes ago. What's your experience with dealing with clients in the cities and all with alleyways, actual improved alleyways?
All right, first of all, is the alley addressable? Or is things being addressed on it? If things being addressed on it, then you treat it just like another street. If it is an access alley, which seems to be common from time to time, that may be getting sanitation pickup and things like that, still add the alley, add it as a zero range. Also with NG911, the parity can be a Z for zero. Still split it at the major road so that if it geocodes and you're doing routing, if that's the closest segment and it meets and it's still faster in terms of impedance to go down that alley, it will do it. Okay? If you don't want them to ever use that alley for emergency reasons, just make sure that you set your speed limit to like -1 or or change your impedance so it never goes down that alley. But you can use that alley along with driveways, things of that nature, kind of treat them the same way. But yeah, you can have zero ranges and they be valid.
That's time for like one more question. Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Back to the fishbone slide that showed our cabin direction flags. When you actually have a true range on the segment, our cat vendor flags those as invalid in their system and requests that I fix them so that the ranges are continuous block. So in your example, I think it was the 401 to 437 block, where the next block would be the 500 block. I'm being asked to put those 400 to 499, even though that's not a valid representation of the range. What would you recommend from a data management?
Find a new vendor, just readdress all your old sections of town. I mean, one is to do two set of ranges, but you can see from an NG911 standpoint, the real range is a lot better than the alternate range. All right. Said we're not doing an MSAG anymore.
And that may be it's for
It's MSAG. So some of our clients do run alternate ranges. So they use their alternate ranges in their current CAD systems, but in reality, they may use those ranges to do their routing, the real ranges. Okay.
Our next presenter said, go ahead with your other question.
I was wondering about the postal information that I saw there having around.
Mhm.
We have some issues in Carter County with, like, for example, Swansboro zip code covers a really large area, which includes the town of Pelletier and Carteret. So for our 911 purposes, we usually just say, well, they live in Carteret or they live in Pelletier. But a lot of people will call in and say they live in Swansboro because they have a Swansboro zip code. So which of those communities is supposed to take precedence when it comes to 911?
All right. First of all, which one is the correct from the post office? Which one is correct?
Well, the post office does.
Well, and we also, I've known the post office also to overlap things
Yeah,
as well.
but they recommend that the post office wants people to say they live in Swansboro so they can, but, yeah, they live in Pelletier.
I know in York County, there's a community called Lake Wiley. And all these are extremely wealthy people that work in downtown Charlotte. And years ago, they started putting Lake Wiley, South Carolina, with a Clover zip code. Contact the post office and said, well, hey, don't they supposed to use what, Clover? Well, yeah, but, we know that it's Lake Wiley. So it's like the post office didn't help us out by not fixing it. To us, from an E911 standpoint, it was Clover, period. Now, there was references in the record that said that it was Lake Wiley, but from a true postal, it was Clover. There is, you do have an incorporated field that you can put in as well. Is those addresses in an incorporated area? If the post office is going to overlap them, and it's a true overlap, my best suggestion is you're probably going to have to go above the postmaster's head to the regional and see if you can work it out. If you can't, you may have to list both cases. Both. So it's like having a real and an alias. That's what you'd have to do to cover both bases if you can't get them to define a definitive line on the ground. Yes, ma'am.
Postal address, I've never understood why NINA uses postal addresses, they never mail anything.
That's right.
It's a stupid thing to do, because what they are acting on is jurisdictional boundaries, which are the municipal boundaries, the county boundaries, and the boundaries of the fire districts or police districts that they work with. And why this legacy idea of the postal jurisdiction persists. The post office identifies a primary or preferred name for a zip code, but I happen to live in a town in Maryland, which is, there are 3 cities in our zip code, with one zip code we share. I can put any of them on my mail piece, and it doesn't make a bit of difference to the post office as long as the zip code is correct. But from the point of view of who I pay taxes to and who I get services from, I better put University Park where I live, not Hyattsville or Riverdale, because I don't live or pay taxes in those, or vote in those jurisdictions. And police and fire are very careful about providing services in the jurisdictions that they are paid by, not what the post office cares about. And this is really random, and I think that at some point NINA needs to say, wait a minute, we need to put the municipal jurisdiction or the servicing jurisdiction, whether that's a city or a county or a special purpose district, as the community name. The CLDXF standard for NINA does provide for the use of a neighborhood or community name,
That's correct.
name, county name, place as a place, and the FTEC standard supports that same hierarchy of different types of places that can exist. Using the postal jurisdiction for dispatching is a bit
Yeah, it's not so much for dispatching, is that a lot of address systems, because postal information is part of a addressing system, not an E911 system. It is, especially with the town and the zip code, along with the street name and the house number or the range. That's how you determine if you actually have duplicate addresses. And at least, most of the stuff that I've been involved with, probably 99% of the time, that would happen. There are some cases where that's maybe not true. But most cities, and there's a problem currently right now that I'm aware of with Mount Pleasant and Allendale, two cities that run together, or they are almost together, but Allendale is actually a county postal town. But then if Mount Pleasant gets there first, those people want to change their name to Mount Pleasant on the postal. But the post office says, well, hey, we'll deliver the mail anyway. All right, so just remember with postal information, just like she indicated, it may not be an exact science because the post office, unfortunately, is not an exact science with it either.
And a lot of people use a city name, but they're outside the corporate limits of the city. They're in an unincorporated area. And they still use that city name. And we can't validate a street name that's in unincorporated XYZ county by the standards of what's in the database for the city that's nearby that I'm using their name.
Right, right.
The streets in my neighborhood are named by University Park, which is my town. Hyattsville, which is a legitimate postal address for me, doesn't have anything to do with our street names, doesn't validate it, and we can have the same street name they have, and we do in some cases, without it being a duplicate, because it's not in the same jurisdiction. The postal name and the zip code are the same. So how does that work? That's where you get in trouble with that postal address.
Right. And like I said, you do have with the NG911, you do have an incorporated field. And you have an unincorporated field, so you do have to use it in terms of that information, or in terms of an E911 perspective. Okay?
We're going to move on now. Thank you, Scott, very much.